Why would I have gone that way? Is there anything? You are now looking at the exit to this level. It's in between these two washing machines. From another angle, I can show you that the exit is pretty clear, as it's just a gap in between the washing machines. I did not find this for 45 minutes. I am showing you this because it will help you understand my slow descent into madness as I desperately search for a way out of this place, when it was in fact right in front of me all along. I am an idiot, and
No, you're not. It's the game. It's been almost a year since Five Nights at Freddy's Security Breach debuted, and its reputation continues to be as controversial as ever. Its release was plagued with a slew of bugs and technical errors, ones associated with a rushed development and release that, until later patches, rendered the final product nearly unplayable. Regardless, it only took players a handful of hours to pick apart the game down to the bits, uncovering every Easter egg and secret ending. And it was only then that another one of the game's shortcomings truly came to light. The Five Nights at Freddy's franchise is notorious for its overarching narrative, incomprehensible to the average player, viciously scrutinized and debated by its most ardent fans. Regardless, when consolidated and observed from an objective level, the story the franchise attempts to tell is a dark, brutal tragedy of deception, insanity, betrayal, and redemption. Many agree that Pizzeria Simulator, where every major character, good and bad, is brought together and burned alive in one blaze of glory, was the true ending to the franchise. Nonetheless, Help Wanted would pick up the charred remains of the story and run with them, hinting at another conspiracy unfurling. The antagonistic William Afton's digitized consciousness slowly possessing a young woman named Vanessa, cursing her with the split personality of the murderous Vanny. And it became apparent that Security Breach would aim to explore this narrative offshoot in a grand, ambitious fashion on a scale the franchise has never seen before. It didn't really do that so well. Hints of Security Breach's story striking a sour note came before the game was even released, with the Steam page's description labeling it, and the franchise as a whole, family-friendly horror. There's been a constant debate within the community as to the intended age level of the FNAF games. As someone who was there when the first game dropped all the way back in 2014, Jesus, that feels like decades ago. It was always my impression that despite the cartoony aesthetic and minimalist mechanics, the game intended to play off young adult and over's inherent unease of animatronic characters, especially the stilted, bulging ones seen in venues like Chuck E. Cheese's. The games were never gory or featured much adult content, but it didn't have to do that to be scary or to tell a dark story. The elements were there for those committed enough to pick them out. But then, the internet happened. There's this whole conversation to be had about how horror media, the accessibility of the internet, and this new generation of plugged-in children all intersect, but that's not for this video. All we need to know going forward is that fans were hungry for a FNAF game that would finally show its teeth and flaunt the darkness it so implicitly embraced, and they looked to Security Breach with eager eyes. So this family-friendly horror designation seemed to many like the studio dropping the ball on what FNAF could have been. As players delved in, it was apparent that things seemed off. For one, the game doesn't take place over 5 nights, you know, the time frame as displayed in the title, but rather 6 hours. 6 uncut hours in a massive, free-roaming environment dominated almost entirely by fetch quests. Get this item so you can unlock this door, so you can access this item so you can pass through into this area, but wait, this door needs a key, but the key is inside this room, and it's just a mess. And there's no obvious sense of progress either. The game feels too big for its own good, and yet all that space feels empty. I know that some players like free-roaming environments with a lot to explore, but claustrophobia was always a major facet of the FNAF games. So when I see an animatronic running at me in the distance from across a giant room looking about as big as an ant, something that was once there has definitely been lost. I know it sounds like I'm critiquing the technical aspects more than the narrative aspects right now, but all this broader stuff is important in how a story unfurls. Building tension, making an impact, story beats, environmental cues, a sense that things are changing. The game does this to an extent, with the boss fights against the animatronics allowing you to scavenge parts from them and upgrade Freddy to access other areas. And don't get me wrong, there are some great sequences in the game. The daycare center, the endo section, and the DJ Music Man boss stand out. But unfortunately, these upsides aren't enough to justify the underwhelming back and forth gameplay that dominates the majority of the experience. The game could have benefited from more linear paths, with a return to the five-night structure, perhaps in the form of 5 separate missions, each one featuring a new section of the Pizzaplex to be unlocked. The areas from the original game could be retained, spread out over the proposed 5 missions and eliminating the need to backtrack and wander so much. Having a layover in between nights could also help with the pacing, allowing the player a break to decompress, absorb, and provide opportunity for potential character development. And what would make up these 5 missions? I actually think the characters, for the most part, are pretty good. I very much enjoy Freddy's absurdly wholesome dad vibes, especially compared to the other animatronics' more exaggerated neuroses. The plot point where a malfunction in Freddy's programming keeps him from being corrupted is very clever. It gives me Iron Giant vibes. Roxy in particular is a goldmine of character, providing not only a surprisingly deep emotional range, but also the most unnerving part of the game with her shattered form.
Nope.
However, the way these characters are handled still leaves a lot to be desired. The boss fights, more like events, aren't enough to make up for the random encounters the player will have throughout the majority of the Pizzaplex. And when they're paired with the omnipresent security bots, which really just feel like an afterthought to ensure the player has a greater chance of actually seeing the enemies in such a wide open space, they become reduced to mere annoyances, obstacles instead of threats, nuisances instead of characters. All this talk of character and structure reminds me of a game that in some ways is similar to Security Breach but does it right: Resident Evil Village. It too is a massive game with a lot to explore in each of its areas, but there is still a sense of linearity to those areas. Castle Dimitrescu isn't just a place you visit for a fetch quest. It's a consequential part of the story that you have to fight and think your way through to make progress. And despite Lady Dimitrescu being confined almost solely to her one area, she still manages to be both a threat and a memorable character due to how her role in the story unfurls. What if each night at Freddy's centered around one animatronic? There could be some bleed over, such as what we saw in Sister Location, but this choice could really help with memorability and ensure a more cohesive, digestible experience. Each one gets their day, or night rather, in the sun, allowing for a more focused, streamlined look at their personalities and backstories. So far, the characters we've discussed have had little to no impact on how Security Breach's story actually plays out. But we've been going relatively easy on the game so far. You can probably guess what's coming up. Alright, here we go. The one you all want to hear about. Of course, we're talking about Comedy Bot. I mean, a robot that tells jokes? What's not to love? The fact that they just tucked him away in a part of the game that most players would never even visit, and a patch had to be installed to allow him to actually tell his jokes in the first place? Talk about cruel. I mean, I could go on for hours about how Comedy Bot is just... Okay, it's Vanny. Holy fuck. Vanny. Not since Judas sold out Christ for 30 silver pieces has there been a more grievous character betrayal. Before Security Breach, she was built up as Afton's acolyte, a young woman tortured by a split personality, that being this giddily psychotic killing machine like Michael Myers meets Harley Quinn or something like that. The trailers even portrayed her as a significantly antagonistic presence, the big bad behind everything. And all this isn't even taking into account the dramatic implications of a split personality, the unabashed torture of wrestling for control with a darker half, the contrast between brainwashed killer and innocent young women struggling to stay sane amid the torment forcing her to commit heinous sins in the name of old ghosts. I'm sorry. All that wasted potential is practically criminal. And I'm far from the only one who thinks so. Remember when I mentioned earlier about the game being branded as family-friendly horror? This is no more apparent than with Vanny, whose character poster portrayed her wielding a kitchen knife, which was then scrapped, along with any significant presence, any protracted sequences, any nuance to her character, especially her other half, Vanessa.
Gregory, we can get you out of here. You and me together. They won't stop hunting you. None of them will stop hunting you.
I'll bet you think you're real clever, Gregory. Yeah, I know your name. You're in big trouble. This is not the night to be wasting my time. So, you are going to wait right there in Lost and Found until your parents or the police arrive.
When did you become such a bitch?
And let's be frank, along with anything that really makes her stand out from the other animatronics. Based on her mechanics alone, you could probably replace her with a haunted lamp, and it would be just as effective. I guess to make her scarier, they added some audio-visual distortion effects whenever she gets close to the player, which again just seems more like an afterthought than a deliberate aspect of her character design.
But it's a game theory that Gregory is a robot and Vanny is interfering with his programming too.
Get out of here with that shit! Not to mention how lame the endings are. The two Vanny endings just brush all we've seen aside with some comic book panels. The rooftop ending shows Gregory unmasking Vanny to reveal Vanessa, but then it cuts to Vanessa's ghost? Doppelganger? The actual Vanessa? What? Ironically, the bad ending is the most respectful to her character in terms of portraying how menacing she is. And the canonical Afton ending doesn't even address Vanny or Vanessa at all. Oh yeah, that reminds me. Fuck these two. Talk about being unwilling to move on and take the story in a new direction. So, okay, the Pizzaplex is built over the ruins of the FNAF 6 restaurant. I don't have a problem with that. But then they have to go ahead and resurrect these tied up loose ends from that game for no good reason other than the lore! The blob has a cool design admittedly, but it appears for like 10 seconds, 5 of those in cutscene form. I don't get it. And Afton's back again.
I always come back.
Yeah, whatever. I thought the point of FNAF 6 was to bring all these deranged spirits in one place and then take them down at once. Is Security Breach implying that Henry and Michael's sacrifice was in vain? That you can go through 6 games worth of suffering and nightmares and torment and scheme to put an end to it all, only to have it nullified and brought back because, bullshit, I guess?
I always come back.
I know there's a theory that the blob isn't actually possessed by dead children, but rather the perpetual agony that was left behind, but that's definitely the charitable perspective. And again, what's Afton's excuse?
I always come.
As you've probably already guessed, ending the story on these two was, in my opinion, a stupid decision. A slap in the face to all that was gained and lost in FNAF 6, and I'm surprised this isn't brought up more often, a disservice to Vanny, relegating her character to a mere sideshow in light of the big reveal. All the potential for a new story direction was there, it just didn't happen. I'm only harping on this game so much because I, like many, am passionate about this franchise. And I, like many, was looking forward to this game being a step forward instead of a wonky backwards stumble. I also recognize that most of these story decisions were made due to time and budgetary constraints. And in that case, I can't be too harsh on the game or its creators, who I'm sure are passionate and talented people who care just as much as the rest of us. But let me indulge in my imagination for a bit. I'm sure I'm not the only one who's sat down and thought about, what if Five Nights at Freddy's security breach were different? It's the near future. The urban sprawl is drenched in a constant rain, but Freddy Fazbear's Mega Pizzaplex remains a shining beacon amid the storm. A place where fantasy and fun come to life, the desire of every little boy and girl. Even the ones without a home to go back to. Amid the progress, there are those who are left behind, a gang of orphaned children, street rats who struggle to see another day. Without a family, they've been forced to depend on each other for support. But despite the hardships, they're still kids at heart, and the allure of the Pizzaplex occupies whatever parts in their minds that remain young. Only one doesn't seem to buy into the Pizzaplex's charm, Gregory. Maybe he's a little older and more jaded than his peers, maybe just a few years ahead, maturity-wise. But the sugary colors and smiling mascots are off-putting to him. The other children, meanwhile, dream of gaining admittance into the Pizzaplex. Some even sneak in when they can, in all sorts of devious ways. The loading docks, the employee entrances, even the trash chute. Just to play games, eat good food, and feel what it's like to be a real kid. But as time goes on, Gregory suddenly notices that he's alone. His friends haven't been returning from their trips to the Pizzaplex. As the days pass and the restaurant continues to glow down upon him, Gregory's uncertainty turns to indignation. He resolves that he too will visit the facility, but not to have fun, to find his friends. Upon entry, Gregory quickly discovers that the Pizzaplex has become a madhouse after hours. Rogue endos stalk the floors, mindlessly pursuing Gregory if they spot him. However, Gregory is eventually saved by Freddy, who explains that his friends are sick, acting strangely and wandering out of their green rooms after hours. He then recounts the incident where he detected danger in the crowd and malfunctioned on stage, denting his head plate and shorting out some circuits, seeming to shield him from what's affecting his friends. They both agree that something is wrong inside the Pizzaplex, and they decide to team up to figure out what and why. Night 1 focuses on the daycare center with the sun moon, and plays out similar to what we've seen before. However, when the lights go back on, Gregory ends up back in the ball pit, where he finds to his horror Cameron, a 5-year-old boy he knew from his gang, but a ghostly apparition, one showing signs of having been strangled to death. Upon discovery, however, the ghost floats in the air and disappears, and a little more light returns to the room. Horrified, Gregory flees the daycare, informing Freddy that a child died in the facility, but Gregory promises that he'll come back to investigate further once night falls again the next day. As he sleeps through the morning, Gregory has a vivid nightmare from the perspective of Cameron, who had apparently snuck into the daycare after hours to play with the sun, all by himself. But just like before, the lights go off. Moon tells Cameron that it's time for bed. Cameron is nervous and reluctant, so Moon decides to put him to sleep himself. On night 2, Gregory returns to the Pizzaplex, informing Freddy of his nightmare. Naturally, Freddy is shocked and upset that his friends are the ones responsible for the disappearances, but he further agrees to help Gregory in his quest for redemption. This leads him to the kitchens, where he's pursued by Chica. He then discovers the next ghost in the trash compactor, that of James, who had a reputation among the other street rats for being malnourished and filthy. But as Chica finds Gregory and attacks, he ends up compacting her and they both tumble into the garbage pit. It is there that he has his first encounter with Vanny, who chases him throughout the pit until he escapes. Gregory's next nightmare reveals James's fate, who had snuck into the restaurant's kitchen to try some of their food for the first time. Unfortunately, Chica, her prerogative to devour trash corrupted, did not discern the starving, dirty child from the refuse around him. And Gregory returns on night 3, but with news of Chica's decommissioning, security guard Vanessa is hired to work night shifts, throwing a kink into Gregory's plans. Regardless, he makes it to Roxy Raceway, menaced by Roxy herself, and he finds the third ghost, that of a girl he knew, Caroline. Gregory manages to decommission Roxy next, but on his way out spots Vanessa prostrating herself before a collage of Vanny, and makes the connection. The next vision reveals that Caroline had snuck in and sought out Roxy so she could make her as pretty as she always dreamed of being. But Roxy, her jealousy amplified by the corruption, finished her makeup, and then saw the girl as a threat to her own beauty. Night 4 sees Gregory again evading Vanny and navigating through Monty Minigolf, stalked by the Beast himself. He discovers the ghost of Tyson, a boy who had entered the restaurant to see his favorite animatronic, Glamrock Bonnie, a detail that had not gone unnoticed by Monty. On night 5, only one animatronic remains on Gregory's roster, the DJ Music Man. He enters the West Arcade to confront the mechanical beast, but despite his best efforts, he cannot locate the ghost of the 5th child. But upon returning to Freddy's room, he finds the ghost, her frontal lobe having been bitten off. Freddy confesses the first victim in the Pizzaplex had been his, that it had happened before his accident on stage, and that he is now filled with guilt and regret over the incident, wanting to redeem himself by helping Gregory. However, a horrified Gregory berates Freddy, stating that if it weren't for the accident, he'd be a murderous killing machine by nature too. He flees into the night, unsure of his next move. Gregory sneaks back into the Pizzaplex to confront Vanny directly, emboldened, disregarding his self-preservation. But he's pursued by the shattered Glamrock animatronics, until he discovers the ruins of the FNAF 6 restaurant, along with Vanny's setup. To complete the shrine, Vanny requires 5 children, and she only needs 1 more. But before Vanny can dispatch him, with Vanny subdued by the malfunctioning Freddy, Gregory scours the ruins, discovering the ghosts of the 4 children that Vanny had personally murdered. And once brought together, I realize this new narrative is not as fleshed out as it could be. I also recognize the fundamental issues with it, mainly its explicit levels of violence. Some compare the previous FNAF games to Jaws, where true horror comes from what's only seen in shadows, or not seen at all. Sure enough, the old FNAF games relied a lot on unseen horror, but that went hand in hand with their simple mechanics and low budgets. So the only real reason to hold back with a game like Security Breach was a voluntary decision. Which leads me to my follow-up point. Like it or not, the FNAF series has developed a huge following in the young demographic, which means merchandise. Lots and lots of merchandise targeted towards children. Would Security Breach products have been nearly as successful if they had been associated with imagery such as this? Especially considering how aware parents are of their children's relationship with this franchise. Hate it all you want, but companies still like to make money. And very often they will choose the safer path as long as it means greater returns and less risk. Still, a more cohesive and respectful story could have been told without being so brutal. Take away the heavier and more violent elements from my reimagining, and you still have a story that both complements and forwards the FNAF narrative we know. But again, we can more likely attribute the game's narrative shortcomings to time and resource constraints. Security Breach will always remain a strong point of contention and discussion among the fanbase. And with the Ruin DLC coming out sometime in 2023, all signs point to the developers seeking to rectify the issues present in the main game, which hopefully includes the narrative ones as well. But only time will tell. For now though, we'll continue to talk about this game, and what it could have done better. Hey there, if you made it to the end, thanks for watching. This video was a long time coming, but once I got everything in order, I'm glad I was able to get it out in a timely manner, so hope you all found it interesting, engaging, entertaining, all that jazz. My acknowledgements go to @Zumazaki, who really just, his patience, his talent, he brought this vision of my reimagining to life with all these amazing drawings. I could not have made this video without him. He's also open to commissions. You could check out all that stuff in the pinned comment below. I'd also like to extend my thanks to all the Five Nights at Freddy's fan artists who put their works out for everyone to see and for me to use. I tried crediting you wherever you were. If I forgot someone, then just know that your work was very much appreciated. And now for some shameless plugs. I'll keep it brief this time. I am a published horror author. This is my novel, Hell's Gulf. It's a nautical nightmare, to put it lightly. You can check that out in the pinned comment as well. So there's also a hidden Five Nights at Freddy's Easter egg in here for those eagle-eyed enough to pick it out. So what are you waiting for?